What I'd like to chat with you folks about today is writing. And right at the beginning, I'm going to give you one reference that I use with my students. It's called On Writing Well by William Zinsser. It's a very different kind of writing book because the way he goes through the writing principles is very engaging. And what he ends up doing is he illustrates the power of the writing principles through his own writing. Anyway, so that's enough I'll say about that. What we're going to do is talk a little bit about writing. Now, if there's one principle, or the most important principle that I can give to you, is that up until today, you have been a passive absorber of good writing or bad writing. You read an awful lot, but you read as a recipient, not as a critic. So if what you can end up doing is from today on, act as a critic. Every piece of writing that you read, it's going to take you a little bit longer. You read something, you then make notes on it. You write down what you liked about it. You write down what you didn't like about it. What you liked about it, that then becomes your habit. Those are the things you have to work on. And what you didn't like about it, don't do those things. So the first principle of good writing is becoming a critic. All right. So if you end up doing that, then I'll go on to a bunch of other principles. The second thing, many of you have writer's block. I don't have writer's block. And the reason for that is that writing is a two-step process. It's idea generation, followed by editing. And writer's block happens when you try to generate ideas and you edit at the same time. Okay, so if you want to write a really good paper, what you end up doing is you first get all your material together, suspend your editing tools, okay, and go and just plow everything down there. Don't worry about editing. And so you may have a 70-page paper in there that you need to have pruned back to 35 pages. Turn off your creative process, turn on your editing process. So writing is a two-step process. A few other things. One, work on the active voice. Okay, the active voice is something like it's in contrast to the passive voice. The passive voice says an experiment was run. Who ran the damned experiment? Okay, the active voice would say, we or my graduate students or so-and-so ran the experiment. This way you know who to blame. Second thing to think about is that when you read a paper, for the most part, well, we all read a paper, we take a look at the exhibits. We may open the paper and read the introduction, etc. Then we thumb through it and read the exhibits. The exhibits should tell a story by themselves. Think about what happens in a magazine. Every exhibit stands on its own, even though it's embedded in a story. So that's the next thing that you want to do, is make sure that your exhibits stand alone, and that the voiceover that you would give if you were presenting these exhibits in an academic seminar or something like that, that voiceover needs to appear as a note at the bottom of the exhibit. Keep them separate from, keep it separate from the text, and then the text should stand on its own and the exhibit should stand on its own. Third thing is tell a story and not a mystery. The worst thing that happens is that we have important results. The abstract says, which has important results with implications for managers, That's, we're not Agatha Christie, okay? We're not mystery writers, okay? Give away the story up front. In fact, the best way to give a presentation or your writing is to give your story away right at the beginning. Tell what the problem is, how you approached and what you found. That should be in the abstract and the introduction. And then the rest of it should just be evidence to support that story. And probably the last thing, that major principle, is a lot of people think that by writing long, convoluted sentences with large technical words, et cetera, makes them sound smart. What it ends up doing is basically not recognizing the fact that you make the reader work really hard. Your job is to write as simply and as clearly as possible. So you need to work hard to make the reader's job easier. Now, what does that mean? Well, you write a first draft of a paper and you really like it. Okay, it's exactly the paper you wanted to write because it's all about new methodology. New methodology that's really exciting. That solved this particular problem. And And then you give this to, let's say, your roommate, or let's say your aunt or someone like that, and said, "You're going to read this." And your roommate or your aunt will say, "Well, what is this methodology? What is the problem you're trying to solve?" What you've written, your first draft, almost invariably, is what I call a writer's paper. That's the paper you're writing for yourself. You know that this is important. You know what the problems are. You're well motivated to go through it. What you need to do after you have the writer's paper is turn that into a reader's paper. Make sure that the paper engages or hooks your reader, somebody who's not inherently interested in that topic. And so the biggest change that you can make in your writing is to read it from the standpoint of somebody who's not inherently interested in the topic. If you end up doing that, you'll be able to do that magic trick of turning a writer's paper into a reader's paper. I'm going to give you two more principles, and then I figure I'll have overwhelmed you. One is to go from the specific to the general. Now, we're academics. We all want to have generalizations and things of that nature. So let me give you an example. Let's suppose, for example, you're doing some work on product bundling. And so, you might start off the story saying, we develop a conceptual model of product bundling at the customer level that can predict which bundles of items in a product category customer will choose. The model is as follows. Now, what happens to the reader, as soon as you talk about a model without an example, the reader is coming up with product categories. So maybe they start thinking about breakfast cereals. Maybe they start thinking about soft drinks, something of that nature. An alternative, and then basically, and you end up saying an example of this, consider the ice cream category. So what you force the reader to do is the readers come up with a bunch of examples. Now you come up with the product category you're actually talking about. And what you end up doing is you irritate the reader, because the reader worked really hard to imagine what those product categories might be. And that reader wants to talk about breakfast cereals. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to talk about ice cream. So what's the solution? The solution is to go from the specific to the general. So in contrast with what I just said, you could start the paper saying, the last time you bought ice cream in some volume, did you buy different flavors? If so, let's consider how you might have gone about making that decision. Okay, and then you explain the situation within the ice cream category. And then you might say the following model abstracts and generalizes from this example. Now that, if you will, is going from the specific to the general. It reduces reader burden. And I'll tell you that that I've had comments from some of the most successful academics in our profession who heard me give a talk like this 10 or 15 years ago, and have said that this particular mechanism has helped cut probably one round out of the reviewing process. Many papers, principle number two, example number two, and I'll leave you after this. Example number two has to do with defending your methodology. There's so many ways you could solve problems. There's so many models you have, and you could do primary source data, secondary source data, experimental, observational, all kinds of things with all kinds of different models. So what most people end up doing, and where most people get hung up during the refereeing process, is that they start off with what we did and then they defend it. Okay, now if you end up doing what you did and then you defend it, you're opening up a can of worms, because the reviewer or the reader will say, well, why did you do this? So for example, let's suppose that to follow that ice cream example, during the methodology part of your paper, you might say, gee, we used a within subject experimental design using undergraduates with at least 2 years of business experience who had knowledge of the ice cream category. Okay, so you end up doing, you stated, this is what we did. And then you say, the reason for this choice is as follows. Well, you've opened yourself up for arguments because you haven't considered the other alternatives, and the referees are going to say, well, why did you use this? Or do another study with this other methodology. You want to cut that off at the beginning. What you could do And what I always do, if you take a look at any of my papers, you'll see something in the methodology section that says something like this. We sought a methodology where we could test our hypotheses experimentally and where the subjects met the following criteria. Here's criteria one, they had to have several years of experience, criteria two, whatever the criteria were. Say, and then you basically say, gee, this is the criteria to select the methodology. And you might say, gee, we considered several of them which fail on a number of different dimensions, but a within subject experimental design using undergraduates with at least 2 years of business experience who had knowledge of the ice cream category met those criteria. So what you end up doing is you remove the possible case of choice of methodology from the from the table, if you will, and you are much more likely to get your paper through the review process. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to stop here reminding you that if there's one thing that you take away from this, tomorrow, and you can become a better writer almost immediately, tomorrow, become a critic. Become a critic. And what that means, as I said, is you sit down with whatever paper you're reading for your courses or whatever it happens to be. You write down with this and you pay attention to the writing. You pay attention to what you like about the writing that made it easy for you, the reader. And then you take a look at and pay attention to what made it hard for you. All right. And again, mimic the things that you like, that work for you, and avoid the things that don't like. Anyway, good luck with writing. It's a lifetime of work, and we can always get better.